When my son was in 8th grade, a friend asked me to help him coach a group of low-income, at-risk youth who needed adults in their life, adults that they could trust. The boys were the ones who knew it and asked for help. They knew and trusted my friend, and my friend knew and trusted me, but to the boys, I was a stranger. These kids were extremely athletic, poor, black, and vulnerable. Vulnerable to manipulation from the adults in their lives. Now, my son knew most of the kids from school anyway and gladly joined the team, which made it easy for me to say yes to the invitation. My assistant coach owned a construction company. He paid for most of the tournament fees for the team. We pooled our money together to buy the kids' uniforms, which included a t-shirt. I was the trusted voice to speak to congregations because there were several congregations in the Quad City area that had gyms, and I could talk to them, talk to those congregations. They'd trust me, and we could get in there to use their gyms for practice. And when we didn't have a court, we went to the YMCA, and so I got a bunch of donors together, and we paid for these kids to get memberships to the YMCA. The year I spent coaching them was one of the most informative years in my life, and none of the lessons I learned that year had anything to do with basketball. My son Peter and I would have long talks after practice and after games. I would talk about what the other boys were going through in their lives so I could teach Peter how to be more empathetic to people other than himself and to also be grateful for the situation he was in. One day, when we were riding home from practice, my son said to me, he goes, "Dad, you know, you always say these guys have no money and they're struggling, but they all have new shoes. They have cell phones, they have jewelry, they have new jackets. They've got more new stuff than I have." And I told him, they don't have money. And what they do have, they spend on bargain clothes, shoes, and phones. If they have all those things, then they don't look poor. What you don't see is no one is making sure that they have food to eat at home. And most of them do not have a consistent place to sleep at night. They bounce between different family members when their parent loses their apartment for lack of payment. Their whole lives, Peter, are spent covering up their poverty. Their need to cover up causes them to make really bad choices in life about what to spend money on and what not to spend money on, and then how to get money. And those bad choices will eventually harm them. I said, this is why Coach Rick and I coach, so we can show them another way to live. Now, if you were to come and watch one of our games back then, you would see young, strong, good-looking kids full of athletic potential, but it was all a facade. The world around them gave them the tools to cover up their weariness, but nothing to address the real sources of pain in their life and the things that they actually needed for security. These young kids needed hope, consistent food. They needed a place to rest. They needed someone looking out for them, not trying to manipulate them. When I finished speaking to my son Peter that day, I thought about what I had said to him and about how I missed an amazing opportunity to talk to him about bigger things. Masking and hiding our weariness is not some condition relegated to the poor. It's a universal human reaction. It takes all kinds of different forms across socioeconomic conditions. I remember a retired pastor sharing a story with me from early in his ministry. There was a member of the church council who was aggressive with the pastor and aggressive with the other members of the council. It had been going on for so long that they just got to the point where they say that everyone just assumed that's, his personality. But after one council meeting, where the man was particularly aggressive, the pastor pulled him aside and he said, "I was young in my ministry. I probably wouldn't do this later on, but I was so young in my ministry." I pulled him aside and I just looked at him. "What's going on?" The man broke down about how work was not going well for him, and had not been going well for a really long time. His job was affecting his marriage, and his son was starting to get into trouble. And just before that meeting that night, he had found drugs in his son's room. His aggressiveness at the meetings was his mask he used to cover up his weariness. But the mask also revealed he was hopeless that things would or even could change. We often criticize social media for masking real pains in people's life. A family will show an amazing picture of a wonderful vacation, but they will not show the pain and weariness behind those images. Facebook, X, Snapchat, they're not the culprit. They are just the vehicles humans use to do what they've been doing for centuries, hiding their weariness behind a mask. We can even see this in an ancient story about a priest. Zachariah is a model of masking. He's an older priest who spent his life rooted in and teaching the promises of God. These lessons would be founded upon God hearing Sarah laugh when she promised a child. He would tell people to believe. Zachariah would hear the suffering of the people he served. He would tell them God hears, God responds, God knows their name. Matter of fact, Zachariah's name means God has remembered again. Day in and day out, Zachariah prays, he worships, he listens, he proclaims the promises of God. His service is a mask of his weariness, though. It does not mean he's not faithful, it's just that he's grown tired of God not responding to his prayers. And why should he not be surprised? Or should he be surprised that God will respond? God has not spoken to a prophet or a holy person for 400 years at the time of Zachariah enters the temple to pray. How can one truly have hope with that level of silence? Zachariah is given a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. He gets to enter the temple to burn an incense prayer to God. Now, that is kind of totally lost in us in the modern world. We would assume all priests go into the temple to light a candle for incense prayer. But in Zechariah's day, there were 18,000 priests in Israel. And each year, 14 people, 14, not 14,000, 14 people were chosen to burn incense, an incense prayer to God. And most of those people entered that temple hoping to wake him up to speak. Now, only God could choose the 14 people, and that decision process was done by casting lots. Prayers are attached to the incense, and the priest watches as their prayers drift up to the presence of God. Zachariah prayed. He prayed into the incense, and then he watched his prayers drift up. And we know his prayer. An angel of the Lord appears and announces, God has heard, God has remembered, and God will bless Zachariah and Elizabeth with a child. And how does this good and faithful priest respond? Think about this. He's in the temple. An angel has appeared. He's been watching these prayers go up. And how does he respond? Do you expect me to believe this? Do you expect me to believe this? Belief is the foundation of serving as a priest. His weariness, which he masked in service, has fueled his inability to believe. It has created a barrier to receiving God's blessing. Zachariah's encounter shows us the power of weariness. He was standing in front of Gabriel, the sentinel of God. It is one of the most dramatic encounters in the Bible, and he can't see it. Gabriel was strike Zachariah mute, but I don't believe it was a punishment, but a blessing. It was as if Gabriel was looking at Zachariah and said, you spoke the prayer, now watch God work, watch, learn, believe, and hope. When we read the story, we need to get beyond the historical things and listen to these words. God is talking to us. Watch, learn, believe, and hope. We are weary people, and we mask our weariness in a multitude of ways, and there's reasons for our weariness. The reasons are varied and really complex. Aging and the physical limitations that come with us cause us to be weary. Death, sickness, vulnerability, and the powerlessness to do anything about it all drive us to create masks to hide our weariness. A changing world that moves at speeds we struggle to adapt, causes weariness. I live in fear of having to change cell phones. I don't know what new feature will be discovered that I won't figure out how to use. Our news now is no longer sources of information. It is delivered to elicit a response of fear and anxiety. Every day, something new is ending, dying, or on the verge of collapse. Then there is the reality feeding it. We know the reality that wars rage. Governments do collapse, and peace is threatened all around the globe. Even our entertainment often revolves around those very same principles. How can we be hopeful in a world so driven by despair or the threat of despair? We do it by creating masks, things that we use to cope, to cover up what we're feeling inside. As I've told you before, I use humor as a mask. The problem is, just like the boys on that basketball team, the mask we often use comes at a price. The mask can create a barrier for us discovering true joy. So as we head off after today into this Advent season, the question is, can we exchange our weariness for hope? The answer is yes, we can. Or should I say, God can, working through us in our condition. Today, we begin the process of learning how to rejoice in a weary world. We begin by acknowledging our weariness. Wounds rarely get healed without acknowledging their existence. But I invite you this week to these things. Think about the source of your own weariness and how you carry it, and what toll is it taking on your body and on your soul. At the same time as you're thinking about that, I want you to find opportunities to observe moments of joy in your life, no matter how small, and silently contemplate what joy does to the burden of your weariness. Then pray your weariness into God's ears. Speak your desire to discover joy, and perhaps light a candle as you pray. And when you're done praying, blow out that candle and like Zachariah, watch the smoke drift up to God. And when you're done, remind yourself, maybe even speak it out loud. God hears, God remembers, God acts. Our job is to watch, listen, believe, and hope. If you find yourself a little hope-starved, I pray you discover hope in this coming week, or at least feel something inside stirring that God is coming alive in your life. Amen.